He invited 3 children into her home for an entire week. He never asked, he never even considered asking. She had told him directly, repeatedly, across 2 full years of their relationship, that no children were allowed in her house. Ever. Not once, not for a day, not for an afternoon, not for 5 minutes in the front hallway. Her home was her sanctuary. Her rules were her rules. She had been about as clear as a person can be. And when she finally said enough, when she finally held the line and refused to move, he looked her in the eye and told her she had already agreed to it. She hadn't. She never had. He had simply decided, somewhere inside his own head, that her no meant not yet, that her hard limits were open for negotiation. That her house, which she had saved for, purchased herself, maintained herself, was already theirs. She just hadn't caught up to that idea yet. She went to Canada anyway. Without him. She threw the party of the year in her own backyard, and he spent the weeks after that sending long, desperate messages from borrowed Facebook accounts, begging a woman who had already completely moved on. He had 2 years to hear her, 2 years to respect what she had built, 2 years to be the man he had presented himself as in the beginning. He spent those 2 years slowly and quietly eroding every boundary she had set, one assumption at a time, one laughed-off conversation at a time, until the day she decided she was done waiting for him to listen. This is cold karma. Let me take you all the way back to where this story started. A medium-wide shot of a woman in her early 30s, standing on the back porch of a well-maintained home, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking out over her backyard garden at golden morning light. A koi pond catches the light in the middle distance. Her posture is relaxed and satisfied, the posture of someone who is exactly where they chose to be. A dog sits at her feet, shot at eye level with a 35mm lens, shallow depth of field blurring the garden softly behind her. Warm, quiet, unhurried morning atmosphere. 16:9 widescreen landscape, cinematic realism, grounded drama. Dallas seemed at the start like exactly the right match for her. He was charming, socially at ease, and he appeared to accept the terms she had laid out without any real friction. He had his own townhouse. He had his own life. The arrangement she had described, 2 people doing couple things while maintaining their own separate spaces, seemed to fit. He said the right things. He came across, in those early months, as someone who respected who she was. But the small things started early. You know the kind of thing I mean, the incidents that, taken individually, seem too minor to address head-on. But if you're paying close attention, they all point in the same direction. He started calling her pets his. Not ours, his. To neighbors, to friends, to anyone within earshot, my dogs, my cats. She corrected him. He apologized. 2 weeks later, he'd do it again as though the conversation had never happened. She'd correct him again and again. The loop never ended. He started talking about moving in, not asking, talking, as if the decision had already been made and they were now simply in the logistics phase. He'd mention repainting the bedroom in a new color, as if that were obviously next. She'd remind him, I like the color the way it is. I am not repainting. He'd go quiet, not the quiet of a man who heard something and adjusted, the quiet of a man pausing to recalculate. There was an early incident that should have sounded an alarm louder than it did. Dallas offered her living room to his friends who were coming to town for the Super Bowl without asking her. She was going to be away. Her house, cable-free, meticulously maintained, used as a party venue for a sporting event she had no interest in. She said no. He got frustrated. He eventually backed down. She thought he had learned something from that, but a person who tests your limits once and then appears to comply hasn't learned anything. They've simply recalculated the timing. They're waiting. And little did Ava know, the real test was still 2 years out, and it would cost him everything. A medium interior shot of a modest but comfortable living room. A man in his mid-30s sits back on a couch, phone pressed to his ear, relaxed smile on his face, one arm gesturing casually as he talks. Across the room, a woman sits very still on an armchair, her coffee mug frozen in her hands, her eyes fixed on him with an expression that is shifting, from distracted to alert, from relaxed to rigid. The domestic scene feels suddenly charged. Warm interior lighting, late afternoon. Shot at eye level across the room, 35mm lens, shallow focus on her expression in the background. 16:9 widescreen landscape, cinematic realism, grounded drama. She told him directly, that was always her way. The kids were not coming to her house. He had his own townhouse with plenty of room. There was a park around the corner from his place. The kids could stay with him there, she'd see everyone when it made sense, in a context she was comfortable with. Her home was not on offer. Dallas did not argue. He did not get defensive. He laughed. Actually laughed it off with the easy, comfortable confidence of a man who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for her to arrive there. He brushed past every single word she said. He kept talking about the backyard, the dogs, how easy it would all be, how the kids were good kids, how it really wouldn't be a bother. Stop and sit with that for a moment. 2 years of conversations. 2 years of Ava being explicit, crystal clear, repeatedly, across the full length of their relationship, about not wanting children in her home. She had told him this before they got serious. She had reminded him at various points since. She had been honest about it with the same calm consistency she brought to everything. It was not a mood. It was not a phase. It was a fact about her life. And Dallas had heard all of it. He was not uninformed. He was not confused. He had received the information clearly. He had just decided, somewhere along the way, that it didn't really apply to him. That her no was a starting position. That her hard limit was a soft preference. That if he just stayed calm and kept nudging, kept painting the picture of how manageable it would be, how fine everything would turn out, eventually she would give in, because the alternative, standing firm against his enthusiasm, would eventually feel more costly than it was worth. What Dallas had fundamentally miscalculated about Ava was that confrontation did not cost her anything. She had not set these limits to be difficult. She had set them because they were true, and when someone ignored what was true about her life, she did not get worn down. She got clear. He had made a decision about her home without consulting her and expected her to comply. She was about to demonstrate exactly how wrong that calculation was. The conversation that followed did not go well. It couldn't. They were operating from completely different premises. Ava was coming from the position that she had said no, which meant no. Dallas was coming from the position that she hadn't said yes yet, which to him was a very different thing. They broke up. It wasn't a screaming match. It was more like two people simultaneously arriving at the realization that they had been describing completely different relationships this whole time. Ava went home. Dallas called a few days later with an apology. He said he would ask next time. That was the entire offer. Not, I understand that I was wrong. Not, I see that I've been treating your home like it was already mine. Not, I recognize that I agreed to terms I've been quietly undermining for 2 years and I owe you more than this. Just, I'll ask next time. And here is what Ava would later name as her one real mistake in this entire story. She took him back. She gave him 2 more days. She let herself believe, in that moment on the phone with his voice soft and apologetic, that maybe the shock of the split had been the thing he needed. That maybe this was the turning point. That maybe he was now the version of himself he was performing in that phone call. He was not. Nothing had changed. He had simply recalibrated, run the numbers, decided to give her what she needed to hear in order to get back to the position he wanted to be in. The apology was not an admission. It was a maneuver. Here is the thing about people who test your limits and then appear to comply. They don't stop wanting to cross them. They pause. They let the tension ease. They allow you to believe that the hard work of having that conversation is behind you. And then, when there's something they want badly enough, when an opportunity opens up that they cannot resist, they try again. Not more carefully. Just more confident than before that this time, you'll let it go. 2 days after Dallas came back, there was a barbecue, and everything came apart. Her brother-in-law Corbin had just received a promotion at work. It was the kind of milestone worth celebrating properly, and the plan was clean and low-key, a backyard barbecue at Ava's place. Adults only. Corbin had apparently been talking about the koi pond to his colleagues for months. He helped maintain it, kept a few of his own fish in there, and his co-workers wanted to see it. Ava said yes, come over. She'd help cook. Her one condition, characteristically practical, everyone does the dishes when the night is done. She hated dishes. She told Dallas about it. Transparency, that was always her way. There was a social event happening at her home, and she let him know. Dallas, 2 days removed from a breakup he had caused by treating her home as his own, told her he would bring the kids. Let that land for a second. She told him about an adults-only, professionally adjacent celebration she was hosting at her house. And without any hesitation, without a question, without any apparent memory of how this conversation had gone only a few weeks earlier, he announced that he was bringing 3 children to her event, as though that were a normal, reasonable thing to say. She asked him why. Why did he think the children would be there at all? This was a work gathering for Corbin's colleagues. It was at her house, under her rules. He said it would be too much work to bring them to his place, that they'd just stay in the backyard and not bother anyone. She told him he was not invited to the barbecue. They were not going to Canada together. She had already arranged for a friend to stay at the house while she was away, but he was not on that trip anymore. He went quiet. Then he said the sentence that ended 2 years in 4 words. You agreed to have them. The air in the room changed. She had not agreed. Not in any version of any conversation they had ever had. She had said no so many times, in so many ways, that the only possible explanation for him standing there insisting she had agreed was that he had stopped listening to her so long ago, he had genuinely lost track of what had actually been said. There is a specific kind of moment that happens in certain relationships, and if you have lived through one, you recognize it the instant it arrives. It is the moment when the fog finally lifts. When every dismissed conversation, every corrected assumption, every small thing you let slide because you wanted to believe the best about this person, they all line up at once. And you see the full picture clearly. Not with fire, not with drama. Just with a cold, unflinching clarity. That was this moment for Ava. You agreed to have them. She hadn't. Not in any world where the words that were actually spoken between 2 people matter. What had truly happened was far more revealing than a disagreement. Dallas had made a promise to his sister on behalf of a home he didn't own without consulting the woman whose home it was. He had told Jean yes. He had built a future in his head where Ava's house was his house, her life was their life, and her no was something she would eventually outgrow. And when Ava had said no clearly, early, and more than once, he had not registered it as a no. He had registered it as an obstacle to manage. A temporary position she would eventually abandon when she understood how much he wanted this. He had never been waiting for her permission. He had been waiting for her to give in. This was the same man who called her animals his pets, who talked about repainting her walls, who offered her living room to his friends without asking and felt annoyed when she objected, who had laughed, actually laughed, when she first said she didn't want children in her home, because in the version of their relationship that existed inside his head, her wants were input. They were data he could weigh against his own preferences and sometimes simply override. 2 years of that. 2 years of being in a relationship with someone who heard her clearly and decided it didn't count. She wasn't angry standing there. She was done, and there is an important difference between the two. Anger means you still want something from the person. Done means the account is closed. The balance is 0. There is nothing left to say and no reason to say it. What happened next was not a dramatic confrontation. There was no perfectly composed speech, no careful revenge architecture, no calculated move designed to wound him in exactly the right place. What happened was far simpler than that, and in a way, far more satisfying than any of those things would have been. Ava just lived her life, exactly as she had always planned it. Without him, he was not coming to Canada. She had already made the arrangements. A trusted friend agreed to stay at the house while she was away. She called her sister Lilu and told her it would be just the 2 of them on this trip. Then she packed. She went. She breathed cool Canadian air and walked without anyone trying to quietly redesign the terms of her existence. The barbecue happened exactly as planned. Corbin's colleagues came over. They saw the koi pond, the real one, the one with Corbin's fish catching the late afternoon light in that particular way it does in summer. There was good food, genuine conversation, the easy warmth of the right people in the right place. Everyone did the dishes. Ava helped cook. Not a single child. Not one managed boundary or explained rule or laughed off limit. Just a perfect evening in a home that belonged entirely to the person who had built it. When she returned from Canada, Dallas came by the house. She told him if he showed up again, she would call the police. He started sending messages on Facebook. She blocked him. He borrowed his friends' accounts. One after another, the messages kept coming, long ones, desperate ones, the kind of messages that say far more about the writer than they intend to. A man who had never genuinely listened, suddenly finding himself in the silence of someone who was no longer available to hear him. A man who had spent 2 years slowly, patiently trying to claim someone else's carefully built life, staring at the moment she simply and completely took it back. He had no framework for this. He had never once seriously entertained the possibility that she meant every word she had ever said. That had always been his fatal mistake. Let's take a moment to look at what Dallas actually lost. Not just the relationship, the full inventory. Because I think it deserves to be counted. He didn't lose a fight. He didn't lose a negotiation where the outcome could reasonably have gone either way. He lost someone who had been extraordinarily honest with him from the very beginning. Someone who had given him every piece of information he needed to understand who she was and what she needed. She had handed him the blueprint, explicitly and repeatedly. Here are my limits, here is my life, here is what I will and will not compromise on. She had done all of that not to issue an ultimatum, but because she believed honesty was the only foundation a real relationship could be built on. He decided that information didn't apply to him, so he lost the koi pond he had planned to let children wade through. He lost the house with the yard he had been referring to as his own. He lost the Canada trip. He lost the dogs and cats he'd been casually claiming as his for 2 years. He lost the barbecues and the quiet evenings and all the ordinary accumulated life that fills a relationship. And he lost every single piece of it because he could not stop trying to take more than he had been offered. Meanwhile, Ava wasn't reading his messages. She was home, her home, with her koi pond catching the morning light the way it always had, her cats doing whatever cats do, her walls exactly the color she had always liked them, no one suggesting a repaint, no one laughing off what she said, no one treating her carefully designed life as raw material for the life he wanted to have. She hadn't changed a single thing about herself through any of this. She had been exactly who she said she was, from the very first conversation to the very last one. Consistent, honest, and completely unwilling to become someone else's idea of what she should be. The only thing that had changed was that her peace was fully restored. And it turned out that was worth more than 2 years with someone who couldn't hear her. There is a pattern that runs through stories like this one, and once you see it, you'll start recognizing it everywhere. It goes like this. Someone builds something real. A life, a home, an identity, a sense of exactly who they are and what they need. They work for it. They're honest about it. They communicate it clearly to the people they let in. And then someone else comes along, someone who sees what they've built, and begins, quietly, to treat it as a shared resource. Not through any single dramatic act of aggression, through 100 small assumptions, a slow accumulation of hours where there should have been yours, a pattern of brushing past the no, of treating what the other person wants as a preference to be weighed, not a boundary to be honored, of deciding, privately, that the rules don't apply to them the way they apply to everyone else. And the person who built the thing keeps explaining themselves, keeps having the same conversation, wondering if maybe they weren't clear enough the first time, keeps giving the benefit of the doubt because the relationship means something, because they want to believe in the person, because it feels easier to keep clarifying than to face what the pattern is actually saying. At some point, the pattern says it loud enough that there is no explaining it away. You agree to have them. That was the moment. Not the breakup, though that was right. Not the Canada trip, though that was earned. Not even the borrowed Facebook accounts, though that was its own kind of karmic poetry. The real moment of reckoning was when Dallas showed Ava exactly what he had always thought of her words. Not much. Not enough to change his behavior. Not enough to make her no mean no. She walked away with her house, her pond, her animals, her peace, and no one trying to repaint her walls. If this story hit somewhere real, if you've been in a relationship with someone who heard you clearly and decided your limits were optional, drop a comment. Tell me what you did with that. And if you want more stories like this one every day, hit subscribe. This is Cold Karma, and we're just getting started.